I'll press that.
Oh, now it's
That's
working.
it, John.
Now it's
Good
working.
job.
Okay.
Good day. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending this session by writers in Kyoto. Glad to see so many people around the world. And we're honored today to have somebody who's started an online magazine and is offering opportunities to writers. And we're very grateful to Linda Gould for presenting today. So without further ado, over to Linda.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today. It's I see a couple people who actually have been in the journal already, and a couple of friends who I know, and Dondi, who is submitting work on my podcast. So this is kind of like a really nice mix. Let me first introduce myself a little bit. I'm an American who was born and raised in Delaware, which is on the East Coast of the United States. It's where our current president is also from. And when I was 20, I quit university and I traveled around the world. I lived in Europe for a couple of years and was so lucky to be able to see, you know, like some of the most famous artworks in the most amazingly beautiful museums that are probably you've all been exposed to or heard of at least. I lived in Japan for 20 years. And I went back to the United States and I ended up getting my degree in journalism and environmental science. And through my career, I've been so lucky to be able to write all the time, but never did I ever have like one kind of thing that I wrote. Even though my journalism was in my degree, I basically ended up writing like PR for the different places where I worked. I worked at a museum, so I ended up writing, you know, exhibit labels and speeches for my various bosses. I worked in government, so I had to write technical papers as well as, you know, PR stuff and informative things, like from everything about, you know, how to use your parks to how to make sure you don't clog up the sewers. So my writing experience was so vast. And when my kids grew up, I decided to try my hand at fiction. And interestingly, when I started writing fiction, because I had been in Japan for, you know, 20 plus years, I noticed how so many elements of the Japanese culture, so many influences from Japan were in my writing, which, you know, previously it wouldn't have been. And then the pandemic hit, and looking for something to keep my sanity, I decided to do something that I had always wanted to do, which was start an online journal. And because of the way Japan influenced my writing, I was thinking that, you know, every year there are people who are invited to Japan to come and teach English. You know, so others, you know, come here for whatever reason. So many of the people who are here are, you know, English majors or, you know, involved in literature or in the arts. And so I just thought there must be this pool of various kinds of creativity here in Japan. So that's where I decided to focus the journal. And I didn't quite know what to expect. I did want to pay, like, I believe very, very strongly that artists should be paid for their work. And I just thought, you know, look at the pandemic and where did people turn for help? They turned to the arts. You know, the museums were offering some of their exhibits online. People, you know, different facilities were offering concerts, television. You know, we all turned to TV and movies to get us through. So I wanted to find a way to kind of acknowledge the importance of arts in our life. So I decided to take my stimulus money, and I'm kind of a minimalist anyway. Like, I don't really like to go shopping. And so when the government gave me this money, I thought, well, I would like to support the arts. And so that's how White Enso kind of came about. The idea of trying to bring or tap into some of this creative energy that I just knew was out there. And then, you know, support the arts through the stimulus. So I do have to tell you, John Dougal asked me to talk a little bit about setting up the journal and the webpage. And before I do that, I have to tell you that, you know, I'm just like an old lady in the countryside of Japan. I have lots of experience writing and designing, but not technical skills. So probably half of you here know a lot more about this than I do. But I'll tell you what I did and the experiences that I had. First of all, I knew that energy was out there, but I didn't necessarily know how to tap into it. So I didn't know if it was just going to be like me and my 10 friends who were going to make this journal, or if it was going to expand more. So there were two things that I didn't want to do. I didn't want to spend my money on technology, and I didn't really want to spend all my energy on learning you know, like how to use new platforms. So through other projects that I have done, I had been using this web page platform called Weebly. And, you know, Weebly just has this free version, and I was completely familiar with how to work on it. So I just chose Weebly as my website platform. I bought the domain name, I bought the like pro level, so that there were certain things that I could do that I couldn't do on the free version. And that was how I built the journal. So right now, each submission that's in the journal has its own page, and I just link, you know, from one page to another to those different pages. In hindsight, there are a couple of things that, if you're looking to do this same kind of thing, that I would recommend. One is there are flippable books out there. Like Issue is one of them, and that's the one that I looked at initially. But I decided to go just with a web page instead of a flippable book, just because I didn't want to spend the time learning how to do this other thing. And maybe that sounds a little bit ignorant, I don't know, but I know myself, and I know that if I get frustrated with something, if I have to spend too much time and energy and get frustrated, I just wouldn't do it. And I wanted to do it, so I just did what was comfortable. The other thing that I didn't choose, which in hindsight, I think I would recommend if you're looking to do this, is to go through one of these submission managers. Submittable and Duotrope are probably the best known. And the reason I didn't choose that, like as a writer, I use Submittable pretty regularly. But from receiving submissions, I just didn't know how much work it was going to be. You know, I just thought, oh, well, you know, I'll just send out some emails and I'll get some emails and I'll just organize it. Well, no. Admin takes up so much time. And I was surprised in a way, like from the very first issue, I got a lot more submissions than I really expected to. And then every single issue is more and more. And I think that, like, I still don't use Submittable, but I'm getting closer and closer to it. The first time, like I said, I didn't know what to expect. The second time, I'm like, okay, I can just reorganize and make it better myself. By the third time, it was like, okay, I really need to do this, but it was Christmas. and I just didn't have time. So this issue now is probably the last one that will be just done through my own submission process, and submittable is I think just going to make, if you're trying to do this, it will make your life so much easier. So that's a little bit of advice that I would have if you're trying to set things up. And a couple of other things, like, I am not a poetry expert. In fact, I really don't know much. It's not even a matter of being an expert. I don't know really anything about poetry. So the very first thing I did was ask for some help in the poetry area, because I knew a lot of people in this area would be doing haiku and haibun and poetry. But I didn't look for help with the other aspects of it. And that is what I would recommend if you're looking to do something like this. If you go and if you look at other journals and they have a list of who's involved, there's often like a fiction editor, a nonfiction editor, a managing editor. And right now, like, that's all me. And it's a lot of work. So, straight away, getting help would make the whole process much more manageable. And this is a little bit of an aside, but because it's all basically me, I really have to push myself, which actually I think is a good thing, to make sure that when I read something, it's not just what I like. Like, I have, through this process, been exposed to a lot of different kinds of work that I maybe wouldn't have read on my own. And if you have different editors, maybe you still would have to go through that process and like, push yourself to be open to things that you wouldn't necessarily learn. I mean, that you wouldn't necessarily like. But when it's just you, it's much more important to make sure that you do that. So, and if you have other editors, they can push back and they can make you, have to explain why you do or do not like something. And I think that's a really good process that an editor should go through. Another thing that I would recommend is figuring out, if you're going to pay people, figuring out how you're going to pay them straight away, and also how you're going to fund it. Mine came out, like I said, just kind of because of the pandemic. And so I didn't think about how to fund this after the stimulus money ran out. So then once it did, I started looking at other opportunities, like Patreon is, like the most famous one. But what I found was, if you start looking at Patreon, it has these tiers, and each tier, has different expectations. And so what it ends up doing is giving you more work. And so I have this whole Patreon page set up, and I've been hesitant to hit click, because as soon as I do, that means more time focused on this. That's all volunteer, because I don't know how much money will come from that. Like, I don't know if people will pay anything, either one time or on a regular basis for this. So, that might be something that you would want to think about and like get feedback before you launch into this kind of project. And the other thing is payment for the submissions. Like, I find that, like, the way I've set up the payment, it's, up between like 1,000 words and 5,000 words, you get this much. From 5,000 to 10,000, you get this much. Visual gets this much. But if you're paying for poetry and you're paying for like essays and fiction, like you can end up with something that has 2,500 words, and poetry, which has like 150 words, or haiku, which has like 12 words. And you have to try to figure out how to pay those without making one seem more valuable than the other. And, you know, I would argue that I haven't done that very well, because I don't want to like pay somebody, you know, like $5. That just seems like $10 is also not that much, but somehow in my mind, $10 is okay, but $5 is like, yeah, that's not so valuable. So that's one of the struggles that I still have at this moment. Before I move on to like submitting, are there any questions that you have about anything I've said so far? No. Okay. Okay, so I know you guys really want to talk about submitting, and I'm glad, because that's actually what I would like to talk about too. The advantage of this journal is that because it's just me and Ellen, and mostly me, it's almost like a community. I get a lot of people who email me, and you know, when somebody submits something, and I might ask them a question, or I might ask them to like further develop something, and so we end up really getting kind of a relationship, which is really great in this writing community. But it also makes it very difficult then, you know, if you know somebody, to say no to them. So one of the things that I make sure that I do is I read everything blind. And I specifically ask not to have a bio sent to me in the body of the email. And when I started sending people acceptance letters and then they would send me their bios, it was like, whoa, these people are really good. Like they've all been, you know, highly published and award winners or nominated for awards. And, you know, I'm susceptible to that too. So if I were to get bios from everybody and see how, you know, everybody's so highly respected, it would be hard for me to say no to somebody. But, you know, if I'm looking at it blind, I and Ellen can kind of look at it through different eyes or through a different lens. And I end up accepting about a third of the works that are submitted to me. And so the thing that I guess I like that it's small and that it's personal. And I like that I can establish these relationships with artists. But even artists who have been well publicized have actually said to me how happy they are that I kind of called them out on, I don't know if that's the right word, but that because it's small, I can work with people. I guess that's the thing that I really would like to say. If you send your work to a lot of literary journals, you don't have the interaction. You just get an acceptance, and then maybe you have some interaction, or you just get, you know, a rejection. But because it's small, I can just say, you know, hey man, I really like this story, but I feel like if you were to explore this part a little bit, then, you know, it could be even better. And I've actually had people who have written to me and said, thank you so much for that, because it has forced them to think about things in a slightly different way. And I really like that. And I think that is part of a community that's worth trying to expand on, you know, like so that artists themselves can talk together and do that. But when it comes to the actual works that people submit, there are a couple things that I look for. I said that the journal is about Japan and how it inspires your art, and whether that's, you know, your written art, or whether that's your visual art, or, you know, sculpture or whatever. And I think that that has caused a little bit of confusion in the people who submit to me, because a lot of them they seem to think that that means it has to take place in Japan, or it has to be about a visit to Japan. But I'm going to tell you about two things today that are going to be in this next issue that show that it doesn't have to be quite so specific. There's a piece that will be in the next issue that is about a locket. It's a is it fiction? I can't remember if it's fiction or essay. And it's about a locket that this person found at a flea market, and it had a little bit of kanji written on it. And so this story is really about this interaction of this woman and her husband, and the locket and the role that the locket plays in their life. And it's because of just this kanji that is written on it. It doesn't take place in Japan. It doesn't really have anything to do with Japan, except for how this very, very, very small kanji has affected their relationship. So there's an example of how something Japanese has inspired a story that is not about Japan. What was the other one? What was the other story? I forget the other story. I got so caught up in that one. Anyway, I'll talk about that one later. So the idea is that if you're writing something, I just really want it to be a good story. Like, as a small journal, I can work with an artist, I can work with somebody and just say, look, this is great, but I think it can be a little bit better. I'm willing to, like, sometimes ask people to submit for the next journal. Like, it's not going to be so strict as some of the other things that some of the other places that you might encounter. It's also open to anything. I have ghost stories, I have young adult fiction, there's experimental literature, there's poetry, there's haibun, there's haiga. I would love for there to be even more diversity in this. Like, I would love for there to be tattoo art or quilt art, more sculpture, more, like weaving, like whatever your means of creativity, I would love for it to be included if there's some inspiration from Japan. But the thing that I have encountered that kind of turns me off is some people will take an existing story and they'll change a name to be like a Japanese name, or they'll just like throw in, I guess because the name of the journal is White Enso, like out of nowhere, people will just like throw in an Enso. So it's like very clear that they're just trying to put something in there that doesn't relate in any way to their story or to Japan. And that just kind of shows that people don't necessarily understand sometimes what I mean by to be inspired by Japan. So I hope that's what this will do, is like just tell you, like, the idea of the locket. I wish I could remember the other story. It's in this next issue, and I should have written it down. Okay, that's I think that, is there any question about the inspiration part that I haven't very clearly explained? Because okay, before you do, sorry, there's one other thing that people that kind of helps me explain about inspiration. I used to give, before the pandemic, these ghost tours. People from all over the world would come here, and I would take them around my town and I would tell them ghost stories. Or I would take them up on this mountain for hiking and to do yoga at the top of the mountain. And in the course of our conversation, people would tell me about like their own, like there was this man who drew, he illustrated work that, you know, was kind of heavily influenced by anime. His wasn't anime, but it was influenced by anime. So there was another lady, I remember, like everywhere we went, she was like, oh, that reminds me of, you know, some scene in some movie that she had seen that was from Japan. So the idea is that it doesn't have to necessarily be about Japan or set in Japan or about, you know, and interactions with Japanese, with our Japanese friends and neighbors. It just has to be a good story. It doesn't have to be high literature. It can be whatever your preferred means of expressing yourself is. And as long as there is some influence or some inspiration that comes from Japan, that's enough. And I know that that's very vague, but that's kind of the whole thing about inspiration. You know, each one of us has our own way of expressing that. So, do you have any questions about that? Yes, that, I think that's Eugene. Yeah, Eugene.
Yeah, so like the second half of my life, I've lived all in Japan. So you know, pretty much everything I'm writing about is in some way, even if I didn't want it to be, is infused to a certain degree with, you know, my life in Japan and the culture here and so on. It's not always explicit though. So is it worth explaining a note to say this is how it connects to Japan if it isn't apparent in the work, or not? You see what I mean?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because Eugene, I know what you're referring to.
Oh, okay.
I recognize your name.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And if I'm going to answer it in two ways. There was something that was recently submitted that very clearly outlined the connection between how a painting by a European artist was influenced by a Japanese style. And I ended up rejecting that because it was, while there was that very clear connection, it was almost like an academic paper. There was very little storytelling in that. And for someone else who submits something that where the connection is not quite so strong, or maybe not even evident at all, I rejected that one, but I suggested to that person to perhaps edit what they were doing, to look at what they were doing and see if they could accentuate the Japanese part of it. Because I do think that the Japanese part should be, if not like, you know, directly explained, it should be intimated. Like people who are reading this should be able to see what that Japanese element is. And in something, when you're talking about loss and death, I really like that idea, because it doesn't matter whether you are in America or Australia or Europe or Japan, those issues are exactly the same. Like we deal with the same grief, we deal with a lot of the same experiences, but how can you make, or how can that person make what they have written stand out a little bit and maybe reveal something about how that is different in Japan, or how there's something in Japan that makes it either different or the same, but in some way connects where Japan is, or what is happening in Japan with the larger picture. And I'm going to give another example about an essay that was in the first issue, I think. It was about a man who was just out on a walk, and he saw some sparrows, And he was focused on these, like on the sparrows and how the mother sparrow was taking care of the baby sparrows. And he connected that then with a mother and daughter who he was encountering on his walk every morning in Japan. And he talked about how the mother and the daughter stopped to look at that and at the birds. And then the three of them had a little encounter talking about the birds. And that's all it was. It was like just about a mother-daughter relationship, but there was an element about it. There was an element of Japan in it that we could all relate to, but it wasn't about a Japanese mother and a Japanese daughter. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions about that? About inspiration or submitting? Yes, Rebecca. Rebecca Ottawa, I have to say, she has had her work in the journal. Thank you, Rebecca, for your lovely artwork.
Thank you for putting it in. I'm really honored. I wanted to ask, do you worry that your choices of the things that are going into the journal, of course, it's your journal, you set it up, you founded it and everything, but are you worried that your way of choosing is too subjective? Or would you like to have other people doing input on that in the future? That's my question.
Yes. I know to Eugene's question, I like rambled on and on and on. To yours, yes. I do worry about that. That's kind of what I was mentioning before, like that I really have to push myself to make sure that I don't only select things that like I naturally, go towards. There are sometimes I will look at something and I will have a reaction to it and I will be like, yeah, no, that's not good. I mean, no, I would never say that that's not good. I would say that's not what I want. But I always, for every single rejection, unless there's no Japanese connection, there are sometimes like things where I just like, obviously, like I said, they'll just put a Japanese name in there or there's no Japanese connection at all. For those things, I just outright say, I'm sorry, I can't use it. But for the other things that I say no to myself, I always go back a second time and I reread it. Because yes, I am very worried that it will just be like Linda's vanity project.
Yeah, I'm thinking about not so much, it's a little bit difficult to explain. The subjectivity would occur I don't know, not so much quality as content is what I'm thinking. The degree of Japaneseness, if you will, whether that's something that you feel is, obviously this is a magazine that deals with in some way with your connection with Japan, and the people that are writing or contributing are also somehow, I'm sorry, I can't really describe what
I understand what you mean. And yes to all of that. I mean, I think that is a concern. And I think that's kind of what I was saying before when I talked about having different editors, because if you are working with another editor and if your answer is no, I don't think that this is suitable, you kind of have to defend that. If somebody else says no, I think it is. And so that opens a dialogue for you either have to defend why you don't want it, or you have to listen to somebody else and say, as to why they think it should be in. So yeah, I think definitely that is a concern. I remembered the second one, but you said this and it triggered what this is. In this next issue, there is a story about a man who is having a sex change operation. and it actually takes place in New York. And the Japanese connection is really tenuous, but the Japanese connection is there. But I really hesitated to select this one because it just seemed so dated. Like the pronoun is, you know, he, and some of the things that the man has to go through before getting this sex change operation just didn't seem very realistic. So this is an example where I just talked to the author, and the author explained that this was written like before sex change operations became common, and the things that these people had to go through in order to make that very personal decision is what she was writing about. And suddenly with that information, like I completely changed my mind about that piece. So, you know, if that was an editor, you know, that would be another dialogue that we would have. Like another editor might be able to say straight away without me having to contact the author. So definitely, I think that it's a concern that I have, and I think that in part it could be overcome by other people being involved.
Yeah, I have done a certain amount of editing myself, and the first editing job that I had was before the internet. I was doing actual physical cutting and pasting for this magazine, and I remember thinking that it was good that I was alone, because all of the decisions that I made about layout and stuff, I didn't have to kind of defend myself to a committee of other people. I'm sure there are advantages in both directions. It changes a lot. I think these days, the things that we have to deal with, the you know, digital stuff that we have to deal with changes a lot of that. And well, so many things have changed. I also, when you mentioned sex change operation, I was going back to, you know, thinking about the 80s and the 90s, you know, because that's when those sorts of things sort of got started a little bit. Now it's not such a big deal, but I think it's really important that people know in cases like that, when things were actually written and under what circumstances. That's if you did put it in just completely, just put it in the magazine without any explanation, I think people would definitely think that, you know, what's this doing here, kind of. Nah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. And again, I think that that's one of the advantages of having this be like a small journal, is that, you know, we can have that conversation, and the author and I could, you know, we had a long conversation about it, you know, like 3 or 4 different emails about it. So yeah, and it's a great story, you know, now because this was written in the 80s, I think it was. So yeah, like, and it's also informative for people who don't know that, like, you know, like, anyway, I don't have to go into
Yes,
all of that. Somebody, I was looking in the chat and somebody asked about the blind reading, and yeah, that's okay. Yeah, so what I do is I ask for there not to be any identifying information in the body of the work, but also in the email subject line. I'm sorry, in the email, in the title of the work. And then I download the work, and then I put it in like, if it's fiction, I put it in a fiction folder. If it's nonfiction, in there. If it's haiku, it goes in a different folder. And then I wait for like 10 days, because there's no way, you know, like somebody might, like one of my friends might write something, and, you know, I'll say, oh, you know, so-and-so is submitting, that's great. But once it goes into that folder, like, you know, my memory is gone. So like, no, there's no way I can remember who wrote what. And then I just look at all the fiction things together, all the haiku together, etc. So that's how I do the blind readings, to make sure that it's not affected by personal relationships. However, having said that, it's hard, like, because I have had a situation where people who I've known have submitted something, and then, you know, I said no, and that's hard. That's hard. Yeah.
So
Even now, thinking about it, it's hard.
following up on that, I was wondering, do you have you refused things flat out, or do you always suggest a rewrite? How do you
No.
word your refusals? Because you have a lot. You said you accept only 1/3, so that's 2/3 that you're rejecting.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a little heartbreaking because I'm a writer too. And, you know, for every piece that I have had published, you know, I've probably, I don't know, I've probably received 15, 20, 50 rejections. So I'm so sensitive to rejecting. Having said that, yeah, you know, like it kind of depends. There are some where I just say, you know, thank you so much. I enjoyed reading it. I hope that you'll submit again in the future, and that's it. And then there are others where I can see the potential a little bit more. And so that's where I would ask somebody. I don't want to take too much time and ask somebody to rewrite it if I don't think that I would accept it, you know, for a future issue, because I kind of feel like that's just stringing somebody along. And I've done that. Like I've had, there are a couple of them where I could see the story was really good, but maybe the way it was executed was not that well. And so actually there are a couple of pieces where I worked very closely with the person over, you know, several months, and then eventually that would make it into the journal. But most of the time, you know, I try to just be respectful when I write a rejection letter, but I can't tell everybody, you know, rewrite and submit.
Thank you. And there's Eric's got a question, I think. If
Oh,
Eric,
yes. Okay.
Hello, Linda.
Hello.
Eric Johnston here. Thanks.
Sure.
It's really interesting, and I'm going to look up. You said Weblio. Is that Weblio? The template you're
No,
using?
it's Weebly. It's a
Weebly, okay.
Weebly, and it's a website design
Okay.
platform.
Thank you. I'm actually up here in Sapporo now after 34 years in Kansai, and I too am actually thinking starting up some kind of a journal, but fiction or non-creative fiction. And I noticed that you accept non-creative fiction, and that was my question actually. How do you deal with those kinds of submissions? You have a journalism background, so you're particularly sensitive to fact checking. Those submissions that do require a fair degree of fact checking, do you do them yourself? Do you have a team of friends and volunteers who perhaps are specialists or experts in that particular area that you send them to and say, hey, can you take a look at this? Is this true or whatnot? Or how
You
do you
have any
handle those
special
submissions?
expertise, Eric? 'Cause I could
Me?
use- No, I'm just kidding.
No,
No.
none.
No.
None.
No,
Journalists are
actually,
generalists.
I don't actually accept things that are you know, like journalistic or academic. I feel like there are already plenty of places out there for those kinds of things. Most of the essays that come in tend to be about, you know, personal experience. You know, one that comes to mind is a family that came back from living in Australia, and he wrote an adorable, endearing essay about a conversation with his son who, you know, all he wanted was a meat pie, and they don't have meat pies in Japan. So it was, you know, an essay about that kind of change from when you come back to Japan from living abroad. Yeah, so that's not exactly relevant to the and if it's creative nonfiction, then, you know, it's a little bit more susceptible to the creative part. You know, but no, that's not really an issue for White Enso.
Okay, thank you. Excellent.
somebody asked about how did I come up with the name. I wanted something that was identifiable to Japan, you know, but I found, like, as I was thinking about it, like everything just seemed a little bit cliched. And so then I'm a yoga teacher, and through meditation, one of the things that I do is I just kind of meditate an Enso in my mind. You know, so like I inhale half of the circle and then I exhale the other circle. And so that's how Enso itself came to be an emblem for me that was representative of Japan. But Enso are usually written, you know, in calligraphy, so they're usually black. So I also wanted something that kind of showed thinking outside the box, and that's where white came from. So if you look at the website, it's a white Enso on a black background as opposed to the other way around. Pretty simple. I did want to say one or two more things about the submission process. So, like I said, I'm very flexible about what is submitted. Like I try very hard to take seriously whatever is submitted. When it comes to writing, you know, again, because that's my background more than anything else, I just can't express enough the importance of editing. And I think that when we have a group of writers like this, you know, maybe there are different people who think differently about editing. For me, before I submit something, I have gone through my work, I don't know, 15 times. I have 15 versions of it. I edit it like first for content, to look for holes, and then I edit it looking for like just individual words that can be removed or changed, or sentences that can be, you know, consolidated into one word. And then I do a Grammarly check, because I suck at grammar, and it doesn't matter how many times I read it, I'll still overlook like the double spaces, or, you know, like a missing comma that's inside of a quotation. And I get so many pieces that look as if it was written and then sent. So I suspect that the group of people here are not guilty of that. But Eric, what's that for?
Being a daily journalist.
You know, but I just cannot accentuate enough the importance of editing before you submit something. And again, I never take my own advice, because there are times where I'll see something and I'll be like, man, there are all these grammar errors, but I'll just run it through Grammarly. Because like if there's something that's really good, I'll still overlook the grammar errors and accept it. So I know like half of you are going to go away from this thinking, oh great, Linda will just take anything. No. Please edit. Follow the submission guidelines, because again, I'm so flexible about it, but you have no idea how much easier it makes an editor's life if the guidelines are followed. They're not there just because we like to have fun making rules. They're there because it helps us figure out, like for me, for example, if you put in the subject line of the email and in the document name, whether it's fiction or not, it helps me know where to go, where to send it, without having to read through everything to figure that out. And then when it comes to formatting the manuscript, you know, like if it's not formatted right, that means I have to do it, and that takes up so much more time than and I already devote so much time. So I know you're all like, oh Linda, but you're the editor. that's your job. And it's true, but you know, you can always make it easier for an editor too. And yeah, and that's basically it. Like if there's one thing that you go away with, it's that if you have written something or designed something or created something and you feel like there's a Japanese connection, send it, because you know, like as artists, like that's what we want. We want people to see our work. So yeah, sure, ultimately we want it to be in a magazine or, you know, like on exhibit somewhere, but you know, even if it's just somebody who sees it and says, oh wow, that was really great, I really liked it, that makes us feel good too. So that's, I guess, the one thing that I would ask you to take away is, you know, just if you have any question, just send it. You know, it's not going to hurt anything.
I think Mike Freeling, you had a question, did you? Mike, can you hear me? No, apparently not.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. No, I didn't have a question. Did I? I don't think I
raised
stuck
your
my hand.
hand.
Oh, it was an accident then. I'm sorry.
So, okay. So any other questions? I think our hour is nearly up. I was wondering what journals or magazines you might be in competition with, Linda.
Yeah, I don't see it as a competition. You
Well,
know,
competition, or what are the other outlets?
Yeah, well, of course, the two most famous would be Cha and Kyoto Journal. And, you know, that's one of the reasons too why I thought of doing this, because, you know, Kyoto Journal, I mean, who doesn't aspire to be in Kyoto Journal? But they're so limited, you know, what they can take. And I just thought there are so many good things out there that, you know, maybe just don't, that they just can't accept it. So I wanted to have another venue for people to submit. So those are the two that I guess you would most directly relate to White Enso, because they're also about you know, Asia or Japan.
How about Tokyo Weekender?
You know, I think that they have a slightly different take. You know, they're a little bit more diverse in some of the things that they cover.
Okay. Any other comments or questions before we wrap up? Okay, well, oh yeah, there is one from Jan.
Yeah, I was just wondering what your plans were in the next 12 months or so, and how being an online magazine, maybe in 5 years you might decide to stop, or how the future, what people are submitting, you know, the life of that in a digital form. I hadn't thought about it.
That's a good question. Yeah, okay, let's take it in two parts. First, this year. So originally I planned on having 4 per year. That was just like way too much. So it's 3 per year. So the next issue will come out this month. Actually, I'm working on it right now. So I would like, if I had my druthers, I would expand it a little bit, because I have a couple of interviews with artists that I would love to, you know, make public, and in some way allow people to interact with some of the artists. But right now, just because of time, you know, like I work too. So, you know, right now it's going to be 3 issues, and it's currently self-funded. I hope that you know, for this next issue, I'm going to ask, you know, people to donate if they read it, if they like it, just like a one-time donation. You know, and depending on how much I can receive from that, or if I continue to do it myself, will also kind of help decide on what the future is. You know, it may be that I have to limit how many pieces I can take, you know, because just for money, but also time. If there were other people who were to get involved and there's some outside funding, like maybe that would allow me to expand some parts of it. So it really kind of, you know, depends almost issue by issue. It's definitely, I'm definitely committed for this entire year, and, you know, hopefully for future years. For 5 years, yeah, you know, like at some point I would really, I mean, my husband and I are going to retire in a couple of years. So hopefully it gets enough of a name, or it gets enough readership that maybe somebody else would like to take it on. You know, it would be this industry, this industry, you know, journals come and go all the time. You know, like if there are a couple of websites that list, you know, like all these different journals and media outlets. And, you know, I can't even tell you how many you can click on and it's like, yeah, this one's not on anymore. So I don't really want to go that way. But I understand that, you know, at some point, if nobody else takes it over, that's maybe potentially what's going to happen.
Okay, Linda, there's one more final question.
Okay.
Hideko Sueoka, would you like to ask it?
Hello, Hideko-san.
Hello.
Hideko-san's poetry has been in the journal too.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm
Do you
so
want to
glad.
Do you want to ask the question, Hideko?
Yes. So as I mentioned in the chat room, I would like to ask about submission of translation. So because around me there are lots of translation, literary translation from Japanese to English. So about this, I would like to ask your ideas of this of my opinion.
Okay. Yeah. You know, translations are a little bit difficult only in that, you know, you have to make sure that the original person is on board with it. And my Japanese is not good enough that I can't tell if the translation is good or not. What happened in the first issue was a Japanese and Australian, I think she was, translated some work by a Japanese woman poet. I think her work was in the public domain, actually. You know, and so together they translated it, and it was public domain, and we ran with it, and it was lovely. It was a beautiful series. You know, if it's something that's more current, then it has, you know, the original artist has to be on board. There has to be somebody in Japanese and in English who could make sure that the translation is good enough. If it's published, then you have to check with the publisher. I mean, there's like a whole lot of issues that are to be dealt with rather than when it's just your own work submitting. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Okay. Thank you. I understand. Thank you so much.
Okay, I think that's all. We've got Lisa back on board now. Are you functioning okay, Lisa? Okay, so I'm going to end the recording and wrap it up by saying thank you very much. That was, especially Linda, that was a wonderful session, very informative and really good to hear of such a successful venture. Thank you very much for sharing those details with us.
Just one thing, I hope everybody has the link. It's whiteenso.com. Okay. Right. So please go have a look at it. There's also, if you write ghost stories, there's a podcast on there of ghost stories, which do not have to be set in Japan. And if you don't write ghost stories and just want to listen to them, you can do that too. But yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. It was so nice to see some faces of the artists who have been in the journal and like get to see like who you are.
Great, thank you very much. So bye-bye from me and bye-bye from Writers in Kyoto.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everybody. Bye-bye. Thank you, Dondi.
Thank you, Lynn.